Mr. Garrettson. I would offer to Mr. Poilievre, so that we got some cross party discussion here. If he wants to be bumped up to go next, I would allow him. Or
Mr.
do
Chair,
I go with the list?
Sure.
Just
Yes.
quickly before you hand the microphone over, I'm just curious if Monsieur Saint Marie is going to have his British Columbia colleagues subbing in for him as well before the night is over.
I don't believe.
Oui, super.
Yes, very soon.
Thank you, Mr. Saint Marie. Mr. Poilievre, did you want to take the opportunity to come in now? Go ahead.
I note Mr. Fraser's humor, but we shouldn't laugh too loud. There was basically no Bloc Québécois when Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister. They had been dead and gone and a relic of the past, and there was no separatist movement out of West, and now we have them both back. So maybe by the time we're done this meeting, the Prime Minister will have successfully alienated enough British Columbians to add them to the list, but hopefully not. On the subject at hand, Mr. Chair, we're simply asking that the government do as the committee requested, which is to hand the documents over to the clerk, and for the clerk to decide, the law clerk, to decide what should be released and what should not. We originally asked that. We passed it in a motion, and the government has violated that motion. Now, there seems to be some confusion with respect to cabinet confidences. We're not asking for the public release of cabinet confidences. We're asking for the law clerk to determine if the documents, the WE scandal documents excluded, are in fact cabinet confidences, or if they have been misclassified as such by the Prime Minister and the officials that depend on him for their jobs. So what we're simply asking, and we offered a very generous compromise, is that all the documents that were excluded or redacted simply go to the law clerk, who is the lawyer for the entire House of Commons, and that he consider whether or not the redactions and exclusions were appropriate, and report back to the House accordingly. Now, the government says, well, why don't we just bring in the Prime Minister's deputy, who relies on the Prime Minister for his job, who can be fired by the Prime Minister at any time, who was hired by the Prime Minister, whom the Prime Minister decides on the bonus, the financial bonus, and who in every way, shape, or form reports directly to the Prime Minister. And of course, that is not an acceptable solution to this problem. The same clerk, probably under some duress, though he'd not admit it publicly, deprived the Ethics Commissioner of information related to the SNC scandal. That prevented the Ethics Commissioner from fully disclosing the truth in that previous scandal. So we can't simply rely on the Prime Minister's personal deputy to decide what Canadians should see and what they should not see. That is not appropriate. Rather, we're proposing that a truly independent individual, that is the lawyer for the House of Commons, who represents all 338 of us, who represents the institution of Parliament, not the government, not the opposition, not anybody in particular, but all of us generally, review the documents and report back to us on whether or not we have received everything we're entitled to according to the motion. Now, if everything has been released, and if all of the so-called cabinet confidences are in fact confidences, then the government should have nothing to worry about. There really wouldn't be any controversy. The law clerk would say so. He'd come before the committee and say, well, folks, it turns out I have reviewed all of these exclusions and redactions, and they were all appropriate. So we don't need to pursue the matter any further. But for some reason, the government is just terrified that the law clerk would have this kind of access. I would point out with respect to that law clerk that he and his office have high-level security clearance. There is no risk that they're going to find cabinet confidences and pick up the phone and call a journalist or head to Twitter and tweet the information out online. The cabinet confidences that they have in their possession, according to this motion, would be kept confidential because the law clerk would be so ordered by this committee. Now, were he to violate that edict, he would blow up his entire career and his life. He would not be able to practice law because the bar would, he would be expelled from the bar if he were to violate solicitor-client privilege. He would obviously be removed as the law clerk of the House of Commons. His life's work will be in tatters. So we know we don't have a risk here that the law clerk, our lawyer, is going to take these documents, and dump them on the internet or proclaim on the floor of the House of Commons. We can count on him to report back to us in a manner that is accurate but that does not reveal any confidences. In fact, what I stated earlier today was not that the law clerk would take the documents and publish them, but that he would look at the documents and confirm whether or not the redactions and the exclusions were appropriate and report accordingly to this committee in testimony. This should be a very easy thing to do. Now, to suggest that it has never been done is completely false. Of course, during the SNC-Lavalin scandal, the Prime Minister was forced to reveal some cabinet confidences because he had one of his most senior ministers alleging that in the under the dome of cabinet confidentiality, he was committing grievous acts of ethical violence, that he was applying undue pressure to absolve a corporate criminal from prosecution. And as a result, yes, cabinet confidences were published to the Justice Committee. Furthermore, confidences that would normally be left in the hands of ministers have been shared with other branches of Parliament. We have now a Committee on National Security, which is able to go around the normal restrictions on confidentiality and review state secrets with an oath that they not speak of those secrets anywhere, ever, and for threat of charge. So there is a second precedent for this sort of thing. And frankly, the parliamentary tradition is that ministers can bring citizens into their confidence if they are so authorized by the Crown, represented by the Prime Minister. So this would be entirely legitimate. It would be completely reasonable. And the only reason the government would resist such a compromise is because they're terrified that the law clerk is going to look at these documents and say, these are not cabinet confidence. They never were. These are not legitimate redactions. In fact, there are no legitimate redactions. The House of Commons has the right to get to see any document unredacted it chooses, regardless of statutes related to access to information or privacy. That's not covered in parliamentary privilege. And so they're worried that the law clerk's going to see this and say, my God, they've been covering all this up. It has nothing to do with cabinet confidence and everything to do with protecting the culpable. And then he will report that, presumably, to this committee. And that's why the Liberals on the committee are acting so erratically. Here we should be performing a pre-budget consultation. Conservatives have been crying out for the need to start the pre-budget consultation so we can get this disastrous economy back on track. We realize, don't get us wrong, we realize that Canada's economy is the worst in the G7, the highest unemployment, by far the highest deficit. poorest growth prospects.
Lowest death rate.
More bad news today from the Bank of Canada that we
point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Poilievre, we have a point of order coming in from Mr. Garrettson.
I believe that the member forgot to indicate, Mr. Chair, that we also have amongst the lowest per capita death rate in the G7. He might want to rephrase his argument to make it more wholesome and complete.
I think that's a point of debate. Go ahead, Mr. Poilievre.
And an inaccurate statement. We have many developed countries who have much superior results in fighting COVID to Canada. But regardless, our economy is in the worst shape. We've got we're dead last when it comes to jobs, and we're dead last when it comes to deficits, and dead last in the worst possible way. The most unemployment and the most deficit as a share of GDP. So, kind of getting worse results for the highest price. And so we want to get to work on that. We as Conservatives wanted to come forward in this committee and propose some solutions to heal
order, Chair.
The damage.
Point of order, Mr. Fragaskatis.
It is not a point of debate here. I simply want to make sure that the parliamentary record is accurate. The member ought to consult the IMF and the World Bank.
That is debate, Chair.
When making
I'm not sure I haven't heard enough yet. Go ahead, Mr. Fragaskatis.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, if I may intervene when there are too many people speaking at the same time. The interpretation services cannot interpret everyone at the same time. So we have to make sure that it's only one person at a time.
Thank you, Mr. St. Marie. Mr. Fragaskatis, the floor is yours for the moment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As I was saying, the parliamentary record ought to be accurate, and Mr. Poilievre is putting forward points that are not. He ought to consult the World Bank, the IMF, economists that work at both, who will find
that is
find
debate,
that
Mr. Fragaskatis. Sorry, that is debate, Mr. Poilievre. Back to you, but keep it relevant
Mr. Chair,
if you
point
can
of order.
to the topic we're on.
So I guess now we can't talk about the economy at Finance Committee.
No, Mr. Chair, point of order. And this is, I think you will find this a point of order. Yeah. Mr. Poilievre has mentioned that the Conservatives wanted to move forward to the pre-budget consultations. And I want to sort of state for the record, and this is on the record, that my motion was actually put forward before the point of privilege that Mr. Poilievre put in. And so it is actually us, the Liberals, that tried to get us immediately to the pre-budget consultations, but it was stopped by the Conservatives.
All right, I take your point, but we've got to get through this impasse. We got first, I think, Mr. Fraser put forward a proposal earlier, and Mr. Poilievre has the floor now.
Yeah, it's funny when you start talking about the economy at the Finance Committee. Liberals cry, point of order, please stop talking about the economy. I mean, I wouldn't want to talk about the economy either with the record they have. It's a complete economic disaster. And as I was saying today, the Bank of Canada had more bad news, that investment is expected to lag far behind, and that the only growth we're going to get is out of additional consumption, which means we're going to continue consuming more than we produce, borrowing more than we make, and all to produce the highest unemployment in the G7. So we're in an economic catastrophe right now. Conservatives want to get to the pre-budget consultation immediately, so that we can come up with plans to fix this disastrous state and try to rescue the economy. Find out why Canada has the worst performance in the G7. But all we have to do to get onto that is to vote on my motion, and we're on to pre-budget consultation. We could be on it. We could be, actually, I don't even mind starting to plan tonight for pre-budget consultation. I think it would take us about 10 minutes to do the vote, and I've still got some energy here, so I'm happy to work even later into the night and get started, at least with the a skeleton plan for pre-budget consultation. We don't have to do it all tonight, but let's get going. We've got an economic, we've got a lot of economic wreckage to fix, and the Finance Committee is ground zero to fix it. So, you know, we're in this strange position where there's a government that, despite having the biggest deficit and highest unemployment in the G7, they don't have a budget. They don't have a fiscal anchor. They can't tell us what the deficit is. They can't tell us what the spending will be for this year. They can't tell us, they're no longer publishing biweekly reports on their COVID programs.
Mr. Poilievre, I am going to say relevance here, and I've let you go quite a while on this. When somebody comes up with the other arguments on the economy, which I expect they will, I am going to have to let them go about equal time. So we're going to find more people are off the sub-amendment, and I will have to allow them because I'm allowing you to go on the economy, and I'll allow them as well.
I say let them go.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand why the government wouldn't want to talk about the economy. We'll add it to the list of the many things they don't want to talk about and that they want to ban other people from talking about. But the question I ask on the WE scandal is what is it that they've got to hide? First, the Prime Minister shut down Parliament, so this committee could no longer meet. Then when it came back, he filibustered 3 committees, the Procedure Committee, the Ethics Committee, the Finance Committee, which we're experiencing right now. Then we said, you know what, just give those WE documents over to the law clerk in confidence, let him look at it. No, hell no, we can't let him see those. And then I said, well, you're violating our privileges as a committee. Why don't we let the speaker rule on that? Oh, no, we can't let the speaker rule on that either. They're terrified to let the speaker render a judgment on the subject. He's actually a liberal, and they don't trust him to rule on this. And they seem to be afraid that he might have a conscience and rule according to the facts and the standing orders, rather than to partisan ideology. And so they're trying to prevent the speaker from even ruling on my point of privilege. If my point of privilege has no merit, well, then they just pass my motion right now. It would go off to the House. The speaker would take one look at it and throw it out the window. But of course, the government knows it is very meritorious. It is a rock solid case for the breach of privilege in which the government has engaged. And that is exactly why they don't want the speaker to have the opportunity to rule on it. So they're afraid of the speaker. They're afraid of the law clerk. They're afraid of whatever is hidden away in those documents under all of that black ink. They're afraid of all of those things. That's exactly why they are here today, speaking for hours and hours and hours, and in the process, sacrificing our ability to carry out pre-budget consultations. So I would encourage the government to put an end to this ridiculous filibuster. The antics aren't working, by the way. We saw in the by-elections with cratered Liberal support in 2 longtime Liberal strongholds that Canadians are not impressed. Liberal support collapsed in Toronto Centre, of all places, the most Liberal riding in the whole country. And then they went from winning by 17 points to 5 points in York Centre, another long-time Liberal stronghold. So I think Canadians have been watching over the last month or so. They saw the Prime Minister try to cover up the WE scandal with the prorogation and the threats of an election and the endless procedural games like the one we're witnessing right now. And they said no. So I think the Prime Minister, who was so desperate to get to an election a week ago, might be thinking twice now. Might be saying, whoa, maybe I'm not in such a great position to call that election. You know, he desperately needs the election to happen before more of the truth comes out in the WE scandal. And he's trying to delay the facts until after the election so that voters can't judge him on his real conduct. But the truth will come out. And increasingly, I think he will find that Canadians are appalled by his conduct and the conduct that his MPs are engaging in on his behalf. So I would encourage members to do the job we were sent to do here. Stop covering up the corruption. If you've got nothing to hide, don't hide it. Thank you.
Mr. Poilievre, I'm just going to read out what the Speaker asked us to do, and maybe you could respond to it. What the Speaker said at the end of your motion, quote, "As of today, it is not possible to know whether the committee is satisfied with these documents as provided to it. The new session is now underway. The committee, which has control over the interpretation of its order, has an opportunity to examine the documents and decide what to do with them." And then it goes on from here. Do you have any response to that and what the Speaker is really asking for? To me, he's asking us to look at the documents, not just send them to him.
Well, he is, and he is asking us for that, and we have looked at them. And I spent 6 weeks looking at them after they were released. And as a member of the committee, I'm prepared to cast my vote that they are not in accordance with the original request of the committee when we passed our motion in the summer. So we are the Speaker has asked us to vote on whether we are satisfied with the documents the government released.
Okay.
And I am voting no to that by voting yes to my motion.
All right, we're on the
already into this. All we're asking for is we want the documents that support the reason for prorogation, and that is the request that we have made today. Thanks.